The reason I decided to do Patrick Lecture 250, Grace, Faith, and Deficit over 2 months was in part due to how difficult it is for some people to grasp grace. And the reason would be is it involves a lot of other concepts. For context, this is Lecture 250. And for instance, the God image, how we view God in the spirit world, is Patrick Lecture 52. So there's a lot of concepts between 52 and 250 that many people who were listening to the guide at the time had heard or been exposed to, attended classes, done study groups, etc. So it's not easy sometimes to understand the later lectures unless you've had some experience, some exposure to other concepts, earlier concepts. So grace was difficult for some people. Faith is difficult for some people. And deficit can feel like a downer. So I want to speak first to any feeling of foreboding that comes from examining your deficit. Awareness is not a demand that you change. Just because you learn something, it's the beginning of a process, not the end. And it does not dictate what you do with that information. And we're used to, once we know about something, we're supposed to integrate it and not do it again. It's a little bit like ignorance of the law is no excuse. And yet we try to be ignorant of rules so that we have a way out, so that we have plausible deniability about not having understood the rules. Pathwork treats this radically different, says that we are responsible, that we did know the rules, and we knew coming in that we embraced, held tightly onto certain distortions. And the idea is that this planet was designed for us to act them out. Go ahead, act them out. Take your plan and put it into action and see what happens. Now, the dilemma, which is outlined in this first section, is that may work for a while. You may be able to lie, cheat, and steal for a period of time, not get caught, not suffer any downsides. In fact, as you amass material goods, it may seem like you got away with it and that it's a workable plan. What we lose track of is what that costs us emotionally, ethically, how that influences our human relationships, our intimate relationships, how holding that belief can be corrosive. Until you've held the belief and you realize how it is corrosive, why it is corrosive, what happens in the process of hanging on to that, until you've lived that life for decades, it is easy to what if and say, well, I'll steal, I won't get caught, I'll be rich, I'll retire, so what? That's not usually the way it works. So in my imagination, I think in terms of if I stole, how would I feel? How would I act weeks later, months later, years later? And my personal conclusion would be that I would be looking over my shoulder the rest of my life. That I would know what I'd done and that I would never know when it might be exposed. This is the stuff of stories, the stuff of melodrama, the stuff of blackmail stories. So you can think you got away with it, and you can think that for a very long time. And yet spiritual law says there's an effect. If you violate spiritual truth or seem to violate spiritual truth, if you try to bend the rules, it's as if they'll rebound back at you. So again, awareness of your deficit is not a demand that you change, but how are you going to change if you have no awareness? So my invitation is to enter into this section, which is exposing the deficit, with the positive attitude of, what if I did expose my deficit? And in this first section, which I'll go through, what is my deficit? So the guide says that we build on deficit, and deficit consists of, and I boiled it down into 4 points. These are all based on distortions, misconceptions, false beliefs that we are holding. The first deficit is that we superimpose a positive belief onto a negative belief. And the best example I could think of is anytime you use but in a sentence. I know I should, but it has the effect of negating the first part in favor of the second. I know I should, but it's hard. I know what the law says, but I know what's right, but. And if what I did was I focused for a while on hearing myself include the word but in a sentence. And for instance, I tried replacing it in my thought patterns and in my speaking patterns with and. I know I should, and. And what that did was it allowed me to see the discrepancy. I may know I should follow a rule or do something that is so-called right, and I'm not going to act that way. I'm not going to honor that. So the question is, what good does the knowing do if you're not going to honor it? So for superimposing a positive onto a negative, consider the technique of looking for where you use but in your speaking patterns, how you negate the very thing that you supposedly said. The second deficit that we hide, that we build on and then try to hide, is that we secretly believe we are unworthy. Now, people say, well, not everybody does that. Lots of people have confidence. When we say something like that, we're looking at the superficial. We're looking at the mask they present. We're looking at the image they project of themselves. And the giveaway here is the less you believe that something is true, the more forcing current you're going to have to put into the mask or the image or the projection. So this goes back to Shakespeare's "Methinks the lady protests too much." When you see a forcing, an insistence, it's very possible that the person's trying to convince themselves as well as others about something. So in terms of believing we are unworthy, people with an inflated sense of self-worth are very likely to believe that they don't have self-worth. They are very likely not self-confident, and therefore they must boost it constantly. Again, when I was first starting with pathwork, I would read something like this and figure out a way to walk it through, to make it part of my daily life. And what I did was I noticed that when I made a mistake that was foolish or careless or stupid, I noticed how I spoke to myself. And one day that was particularly harsh. And I was struck by the harshness. And I asked myself, would I speak to someone I loved like that? Specifically, would I treat my children like that? And the answer was absolutely not. Change it however you want, your friend, your brother, your sister. Would you really be so vicious and negative and condemning of another person the way you are to yourself? And this is a giveaway. And that's what I realized, was that I was beating myself up instead of being charitable. That doesn't mean I accept what I did as right. It just means to be charitable. It means give myself a break. I now know that I did something wrong. Let's see what we can do to correct it. And let's find out what caused the poor decision so that we don't simply repeat it. So if you're looking at the effect, you're going to have to backtrack to find the cause, because if you don't correct the cause, you'll just create a different version of an effect. So slapping down the effect doesn't change the cause unless the cause is already dissolved. This is how I personally feel about affirmations. They're great if the cause isn't active. But if the cause is active, you can say all you want. I am a child of God and I deserve love. And the question is that how you treat yourself? You know, is that your inner thought process? And while it may be when you consider it, when you're in meditation, is that how you treat yourself in the spur of the moment as a knee-jerk reaction? What happens when you're stressed? What happens when you make a snap decision? Are you charitable and loving and generous? Or are you cruel and unforgiving? It's a giveaway to how you see yourself. So by seeing ourselves as unworthy, how can you build on spiritual truth if one of the spiritual laws is law of brotherhood, which means we're all in this together. We're all spiritual beings and we're all working towards something that includes us, includes me, includes you. And that's an inherent worthiness. We didn't sneak onto the planet Earth. There are rules in heaven. There are boundaries. There are gatekeepers. This is explained in the lectures. You don't just wander in off the street. To come to this planet, you have to have a plan. Because if you don't, you can wreck other people's plans. And since every person is valuable, every plan is valuable. So that's why the guide talks in terms of teams. You got a team out there working to navigate you so that you don't disrupt other people's plans and to assist you in enacting your own plan, which, to repeat, is to find out what false beliefs, misconceptions, and distortions you're holding so that you can then try to release them. So again, we have to become aware of the truth before we can let go of untruth. If you let go of untruth, number one, you don't know it's untruth until you know truth. And secondly, how do you let go of something if there's no alternative? So awareness is key here. The third way we build on deficit is that we embrace real and false guilts. Now, this is a couple of lectures, and it also confuses people. What's wrong with real guilt? Real guilt should, I'm not sure what word to use, I'm going to let that go, but should is the wrong word here. Real guilt should instigate a process of trying to figure out restitution. A lecture, restitution for real guilt. So to accept your guilt without considering restitution, how do you make up for having acted in a certain way if you were wrong and now you know it? If you don't have some way of creating some form of restitution, not necessarily on the earth plane, but at least inside spiritually, to take full responsibility for what you did, to acknowledge it, and then show that you understand and you're doing things differently. If you can't do that, the real guilt is just a cudgel to beat yourself to death with. Now, false guilts are obviously a deliberate way of distracting yourself. It's a way of creating a whole bunch of miscellaneous stuff that's not real. So you can chase it around or give it to other people and they can chase around so that nobody ever finds out about your real guilt. So embracing real and false guilts is a way to build on deficits. You don't necessarily want to embrace false guilt. You want to become aware of it, acknowledge it, and decide what taking responsibility means, and then enacting, doing something about it. And the fourth is that we defend against our spiritual origins. Fancy way of saying we secretly don't believe that spirit is a great place, so we really want to hang on to what we've got. We disparage the world of spirit. We believe false things about the world of spirit. It is, on some level, it can be ludicrous for us to say, I understand what God is, and I understand the spirit world, and I don't know how the human mind can really understand all this. And over again in the lectures, the guide says, I don't know how to explain some things to you. You have no experience of these things. You don't even have the words that I have, the concepts that I have. Specifically, in one lecture, he says, there are more colors in spirit than you can ever experience on earth. How can I describe that color to you? Without having experienced it, you can't really know it. And that's where, in this lecture, faith comes in. Going to have some faith, because you're never going to be able to do a spreadsheet or get it under a microscope or do a proof of how spirit operates and what goes on. We have to feel our way through it. And we have the tools for that. We have a divine knowing inside us. The trick is we need to partner with it and bring it forward. So part of the problem with all this stuff is that the earth plane is not transparent. Matter hides things. The guide describes, and science fiction also plays with this a lot, the guide describes that in spirit, they can see everything. Nothing is a surprise. You, in all your shades of whatever you are perfectly apparent to the next person. You don't have to explain anything, and you can't hide anything. And the only analogy on the planet is to be naked. And nakedness is daunting for most of us because we don't look like the images that we imagine. We don't look like a perfect specimen. It betrays our eating habits. It betrays our lack of exercise. It betrays a lot of things. So on the earth plane, we're not transparent, and therefore we can hide stuff. And in this process of finding out how our false beliefs, distortions, and misconceptions don't work, that's where we can hide them. And we can also hide the effects. I can be miserable, and you won't have to know. So snapshots, especially Facebook is famous for this. Snapshots are only taken when someone is happy. I cannot remember a single photo. My parents were photo happy in the 50s and 60s. I don't know of a single picture of me unhappy, or any member of my family or my extended family. No one took pictures of someone when they were depressed or unhappy. So the scrapbooks are filled with happy faces. Whether that's real or not, it doesn't matter. You made mom or dad happy if you smiled for the picture, and that was acceptable. Spiritual work is going deeper. And perhaps you have experienced looking at a picture and seeing the sadness behind the smile. So while we may not be transparent, we can see more deeply than we realize. We can see more deeply than we may be willing to admit. And this is because there's a knowing. We can read energy. We can sense discrepancy. And we know right from wrong. Children are famous for the phrase, all kids know right from wrong. We just know that. And it doesn't matter how you're raised. You know what the norm is, and you know what creates problems. And you know that the authorities are somewhat against your making problems. So you know what lane to stay in to some degree. We know right from wrong. And we know it because we already have a sense of it. It's a rudimentary sense that can be manipulated and distorted, which is part of our journey, but it's still there. So the idea is to get back to that divine knowing, to get back to the place in you that really is a Geiger counter and really knows false from true, good from bad, spiritual truth from untruth. Takes a while to calibrate that Geiger counter, and we make mistakes. The other thing I learned in my journeys was the value of renegotiating. That was a foreign concept to me. For reasons of my childhood and early adulthood, I thought once you made a promise, you were done. And my read of cultural history is that this is an archetype for the human race. And it's represented by the Western civilization version story of Faust. Now, there are a zillion stories, Faust, Daniel Webster, etc. And I've mentioned this before. I use the same stories a lot. We used to think that if you signed with the devil, if you sold your soul, that was it. You were done. There was no escape. Once you committed a certain sin, there was no way back. It's a child's interpretation of authority, punishment, keeping people straight that civilization actively participated in. The pathwork teaches that there is no absolute. Yes, you signed. Yes, you sold. Yes, you gave away. Yes, you did certain things. And your spirit continues. If you don't have time left in this lifetime, then pick it up in the next incarnation. Or if you don't believe in reincarnation, that's great. You'll pick it up in the next iteration that your divine being will go through. There's no losing. Losing is against spiritual law. Winning is a poor term for inevitability. And the guide presents salvation, unity, coming together as inevitable. It's one of my favorite words in pathwork. So slow it down as much as you want. It's inevitable. So short summary, Grace, Faith, and Deficit, Pathwork Lecture 250, Part 2, Week 1, Exploring the Deficit. It's a fascinating lecture, even broken up into 8 parts. There's a lot there that I left out, inviting you to go find what sings to your heart. Thanks for listening.